After the court loss, after the palace snub, after years of interviews, headlines, accusations, silence, anger, and distance, Prince Harry walked back into a room with King Charles. But this time, he did not come alone. Meghan was there. Archie was there. Lilibet was there. And for the first time in years, the king was not just facing the son who had hurt him, challenged him, and walked away from royal life. He was facing his grandchildren. That is what makes this moment different. Because royal stories usually come wrapped in titles, protocol, palace statements, and carefully chosen words. But underneath all of that, this is a much simpler and much more painful story. A father and a son stopped speaking properly. A grandfather missed years of his grandchildren's lives. A family turned private pain into public history. And now, after everything, they have met again. Not on a balcony, not at a state event, not in front of cameras. Not with an official family photograph released to the world 5 minutes later. Quietly, privately, at Highgrove. And that silence may be the most important part of the entire story. Because if you have followed this saga from the beginning, you know this was not supposed to happen like this. Just days before the meeting, the mood around Harry's visit to Britain looked cold, complicated, and honestly, almost hopeless. There had been reports that Harry had been denied accommodation at a royal residence. There had been more legal disappointment connected to his battles with the British press. There were still unresolved concerns around security, the very issue Harry has repeatedly said affects whether he feels able to bring Meghan and the children to the United Kingdom. And then, almost suddenly, the story changed. The family came. The meeting happened. Buckingham Palace confirmed that there had been contact but gave almost nothing away. No emotional quote from the king, no official photograph of Charles holding Lilibet's hand, no carefully staged image of Archie walking through the garden at Highgrove, no public moment designed to tell the world that everything was healed. And in a strange way, that makes it feel more real. Because when royal reconciliation is packaged too perfectly, people immediately start looking for the strategy behind it. Who benefits? Who briefed it? Who wanted the picture? Who is trying to repair their image? But this meeting did not give the public much to consume. It gave us only the outline. Harry, Meghan, Archie and Lilibet met King Charles and Queen Camilla at Highgrove. It was private. Details were not shared. No photographs are expected. And according to reports, the king wanted it kept that way. That is not a small detail. That is the entire emotional key to the moment. Because Charles may be king, but in this scene, he is also a father who has spent years watching the rupture with his younger son become part of global entertainment. Every accusation, every interview, every documentary, every excerpt from Spare, every headline about William, Catherine, Camilla, the palace, the press, the security fights, the court cases, the invitations, the non-invitations. It all became public. So if there was going to be any kind of first step back, it could not look like another episode in the show. It had to be quiet. It had to be protected. It had to happen in a room where nobody outside the family got to hear the first sentence. And that is why this meeting matters. Not because it means everything is fixed. It does not. Not because it means Harry is suddenly back inside the royal fold. He is not. Not because it means William is ready to forgive him. There is no sign of that. But because for the first time in a long time, the story moved in the opposite direction. For years, every major turn seemed to push Harry and the royal family further apart. The Oprah interview opened a wound the palace never really closed. The Netflix series made private grievances feel cinematic and permanent. Spare put family pain into print in a way that could not be taken back. Harry's criticism of Camilla cut especially deep, because it touched the king's wife, his second marriage, and the emotional architecture of his later life. And on the other side, the palace did what the palace often does. It stayed cold. It stayed controlled. It said very little. Sometimes silence can look dignified. Sometimes it can look cruel. In this family, it has often looked like both at the same time. So by the time Harry returned to Britain again, many people assumed the pattern would repeat. He would arrive. There would be speculation. Maybe he would see his father briefly. Maybe he would not. There would be competing briefings. Someone would say the king was too busy. Someone would say Harry had made contact. Someone else would say no formal meeting was possible. And then Harry would leave, and the whole thing would feel like another missed chance. But this time, the missed chance did not stay missed. The door opened, and the people who walked through it were not only Harry and Meghan. They were Archie and Lilibet. That changes the emotional temperature of the story. Because adults can defend distance. They can explain it. They can justify it. They can say too much has happened. They can say trust has been broken. They can say the timing is not right. They can say there are security concerns, logistical problems, constitutional sensitivities, family tensions, press risks, staff complications, and 100 other reasons to wait. But children keep growing, while adults are still explaining why the moment is complicated. Archie is not frozen in time, as the little boy the public barely saw before Harry and Meghan left royal life. Lilibet is not just a name in a palace statement. They are children with voices, memories, habits, questions, and a family story that is much bigger than they are old enough to understand. And King Charles has missed years of that. That is the human cost hiding under all the royal language. When people talk about the Sussexes and the royals, the conversation usually becomes tribal very quickly. Some people see Harry and Meghan as victims of an institution that never protected them properly. Others see them as people who left, attacked the family, profited from royal proximity, and then still expected access when it suited them. But whichever side someone is on, there is something difficult about a grandfather not seeing his grandchildren for years, especially now. Charles is 77. He has been undergoing cancer treatment. He became king late in life, after waiting longer than any heir in British history. He carries the crown, the schedule, the constitutional role, the burden of the monarchy after Elizabeth II, and the constant question of what kind of reign he will leave behind. But time does not slow down because someone is king. If anything, it becomes more visible. That may be why this meeting feels heavier than a normal family visit. It is not just about whether Harry and Charles can be polite over tea. It is about time that cannot be recovered. The birthdays missed, the ordinary afternoons missed, the first real conversations missed, the small details a grandparent usually knows without thinking. What makes a child laugh, what they are scared of, how they run into a room, whether they are shy at first and then suddenly loud, whether they ask direct questions nobody knows how to answer. Those things are not constitutional. They are not royal. They are just life. And that is why the children may have done what no palace advisor, no public statement, no interview, and no legal argument could do. They may have made the situation too human to keep frozen. Because once the grandchildren are in the room, the story is no longer only about who said what on television. It is about whether a family is willing to lose even more years. That does not erase the past, and it should not. One of the mistakes people make with reconciliation stories is pretending that a single meeting has magical power, as if one private visit can undo 6 years of rupture, as if a cup of tea at Highgrove can erase a memoir, a documentary, lawsuits, briefings, resentment, and deep personal humiliation. It cannot. The pain in this family is not superficial. It is layered. Harry did not just leave a job. He left the central structure of royal life and then described that structure as damaging. He did not simply move abroad. He built a new identity partly around explaining why he had to leave. He did not only criticize the institution, he described personal moments involving his father, his brother, his stepmother, and the machinery around them. And for the palace, especially for William, that is not a media cycle. That is betrayal. But Charles is not William, and this is where the story becomes very interesting. A father can be wounded and still want the door open. A brother can be wounded and want it shut. Those are not the same relationship. Charles and Harry have a complicated history, but it is a father-son history. There is disappointment there. There is probably embarrassment. There may be anger, exhaustion, and fear of being dragged into another public storm. But there is also age, illness, memory, and the very basic fact that Harry is still his son. William's position is different. For William, Harry is not only the younger brother who left, he is the brother who spoke publicly about private conflict. He is the brother who described a physical confrontation. He is the brother whose words affected Catherine, the children, and the future king's household. He is the brother who did not just break away from the monarchy, but in William's eyes may have weakened it from the outside. That is why the question at the end of this story is not really, did Charles and Harry meet? They did. The deeper question is, can a father's forgiveness create a path where a brother's trust is still gone? And nobody knows the answer. But before we get to William, we have to stay with Highgrove for a moment, because the location matters. This was not Buckingham Palace, with all its symbolism of monarchy, institution, staff, ceremony, and state. It was not Windsor Castle, heavy with history and the memory of Queen Elizabeth. It was not Sandringham, where the family gathers for Christmas and where royal rituals are watched like national theatre. It was Highgrove, Charles's country home in Gloucestershire, a place associated with gardens, retreat, personal taste, and the private life he built over decades. Highgrove is not neutral, of course. Nothing royal is ever completely neutral. But compared with the grand machinery of Buckingham Palace, it feels more personal. And that choice says something. If the meeting had happened at the palace, it would have looked like Harry being received by the crown. At Highgrove, it looks more like Harry being received by his father. That distinction is everything, because Harry's conflict has always been with both, the family and the institution. Sometimes he separates them. Sometimes he does not. Sometimes he speaks as a son who wants his father back. Sometimes he speaks as a man who believes the royal system failed his wife and damaged his life. And for Charles, those two versions of Harry must be incredibly hard to hold at the same time. How do you meet the son who says he loves you, but also publicly expose the pain inside your family? How do you welcome the grandchildren while wondering whether any private detail could someday become public? How do you act like a grandfather without forgetting that you are also the king? That is the emotional tension inside this meeting. And it is why privacy was not just a preference. It was probably a condition. Because privacy is the one thing this family has not been able to protect. Harry has often argued that he wanted control over his own story, because the press and the palace machine had distorted it for years. His supporters see that as necessary self-defense. His critics see it as contradiction, demanding privacy while revealing private family moments on a global stage. But whichever view you take, the result is the same. Trust became the central issue. Not love. Trust. It is possible Charles still loves Harry deeply. It is possible Harry still loves his father deeply. That does not automatically mean either man trusts the other with the next step. And maybe that is why this reunion had to be so stripped down. No cameras, no briefing about the conversation, no sentimental palace photo, no polished narrative of healing. Just the meeting, just the people. Just enough movement to suggest the war is not the only possible future. And if you are watching this closely, that is the part worth paying attention to. Not the fantasy version where everyone hugs, cries, forgives everything, and Christmas at Sandringham is suddenly back on the table. That is not where we are. The meaningful version is smaller and more fragile. A king who has every reason to be cautious still agreed to see his son's family. A son who has every reason to feel rejected still brought his children. A duchess who has not been seen in Britain publicly for years still came into the country for this private family moment. And two children, who have mostly known this side of their family through distance, names, photographs, and stories, were suddenly inside the room. That is enough. Not enough to heal everything, but enough to change the shape of the next question. Because before this meeting, the question was, will Charles and Harry even see each other properly again? Now the question is, what happens after they have? And that is much more dangerous. Because a meeting can be symbolic, the aftermath requires choices. If Charles wants a continuing relationship with Archie and Lilibet, how often can that happen? Where can it happen? Under what security arrangements? With what level of privacy? Will Meghan feel safe returning? Will Harry agree to keep family moments away from public commentary? Will the palace stop treating every Sussex visit like a logistical hazard? And perhaps most importantly, will William tolerate any of this? Because if this reunion becomes the beginning of a warmer relationship between Charles and Harry, it does not happen in a vacuum. It happens inside a royal family where William is not simply another relative. He is the heir. He is the future of the monarchy. His household, his wife, his children, and his public role are all part of the calculation. Charles may want peace before it is too late. William may want accountability before there is any peace at all. Those desires can collide, and that is why this meeting, as quiet as it was, may create new tension even as it softens old pain. A private family reunion can look gentle from the outside, but inside a monarchy, every family gesture has consequences. Who gets access? Who is forgiven? Who is kept at a distance? Who decides when the past is past? Who has the authority to reopen a door that others wanted closed? These are not small questions, and they are not just emotional. They are institutional. Because Harry is not an ordinary estranged son. He is the king's son. He is the brother of the future king. His children are part of the royal line. Meghan remains one of the most controversial figures attached to the modern monarchy. Every move they make is interpreted, weaponized, defended, attacked, and turned into meaning. So for Charles to allow this meeting, privately but knowingly, suggests something very important. He may be choosing the family timeline over the media timeline. The media timeline says every conflict must have a winner and a loser. Every reunion must be a strategy. Every silence must hide a briefing. Every gesture must be decoded as weakness, revenge, manipulation, or image repair. But the family timeline is different. It says people get older, children grow, illness changes priorities. Anger can remain, but urgency can change. And sometimes the question is no longer who was right. Sometimes the question becomes, how much more time are we willing to lose? That question hangs over this entire story. It hangs over Charles because he is the father and the grandfather. It hangs over Harry because he has spent years saying he wants reconciliation. But reconciliation requires restraint as much as honesty. It hangs over Meghan because any return to Britain, even a private one, carries risk, scrutiny, and old wounds. It hangs over Archie and Lilibet because they are too young to choose the family history they have inherited. And it hangs over William most of all, because if Charles has opened the door even slightly, William now becomes the wall everyone is watching. That may sound harsh, but it is the reality of the story. The king has met Harry. The king has seen the children. The king has allowed a private moment to happen after years of rupture. But there is still no public sign that William is ready for anything similar. And maybe that is because the wound between brothers is deeper than the wound between father and son.
A father can look at his child and remember the baby, the boy, the grief after Diana, the soldier, the son who walked behind his mother's coffin, the young man who struggled inside a system he never fully seemed to fit. A brother remembers different things. A brother remembers rivalry, shared rooms, shared trauma, private jokes, fights nobody else saw, promises made in the dark. The feeling of being understood by the only other person who truly knew what that childhood was like. And when that breaks, it can feel more personal than anything. That is the shadow behind the Highgrove reunion. It is a hopeful story, yes, but it is not a simple one. Because the meeting with Charles may be the first step toward healing, or it may reveal just how isolated the remaining fracture with William really is. And that brings us to the most delicate detail of all. According to reports, Harry gave his father one promise before or around this reunion. A promise that may matter more than the meeting itself. He reportedly agreed not to speak publicly about the private details, and if that promise holds, it could mark the first real test of whether this new chapter is different from everything that came before. Because for years, Harry's public voice has been the center of the storm. That voice changed everything. It gave him independence. It gave Meghan a way to explain what she said she went through. It gave millions of people a version of royal life that sounded nothing like the polished balcony image. It also made the family feel exposed in a way they may never fully forgive. So now, the most powerful thing Harry can do may not be to speak. It may be to stay quiet. That sounds simple, but for this story, it is enormous. Because silence has meant different things to different people in this family. For the palace, silence has always been a tool of survival. Do not explain. Do not complain. Let the storm pass. Keep the institution higher than the argument. Protect the crown by refusing to wrestle in public. For Harry, silence often seemed like part of the injury. He has described a world where silence protected the system, not the person. A world where pain was managed, not heard. A world where his wife felt abandoned, and he felt trapped between loyalty and survival. So if Harry is now choosing silence around this meeting, that is not just good manners. It is a major shift. It suggests he understands that reconciliation cannot survive if every private step becomes public content. And if you're enjoying this kind of slower, more human royal analysis, this is a good moment to subscribe, because the next stage of this story will not be obvious from the headlines. It will be hidden in what people do not say. That is the strange thing about this reunion. The less we know, the more important it may be. If someone had immediately leaked a detailed account of the conversation, we would already be back in the old pattern. Who cried, who apologized, who refused to apologize. What Camilla said, what Meghan wore, whether Archie hugged Charles first, whether Lilibet recognized him, whether Harry mentioned security, whether the king raised the memoir, whether anyone spoke about William. That kind of detail would feed the audience for a day, but it would also poison the next meeting before it could happen. So the lack of detail is not empty. It is protective, maybe even strategic. Because in a relationship where trust has been damaged, the first private moment has to remain private. Otherwise, it proves the fear was justified. And Charles, according to reports, was adamant that this not become a public spectacle. That tells us something about his terms. He may be willing to see Harry. He may be willing to see Meghan. He may deeply want to know Archie and Lilibet. But he is not willing to let that desire become another royal media event. The king can open the door, but he wants control over the room. And that is a very Charles position. Emotional but cautious. Personal but managed. Warm enough to allow contact. Controlled enough to prevent chaos.
For Harry, accepting that may be the price of coming back into any kind of family relationship. Not back as a working royal, not back into the institution, but back into the private circle where family can exist without a microphone nearby. And that is where this story becomes less about public forgiveness and more about discipline. Can Harry keep a boundary around this? Can the palace resist briefing against him the moment something becomes uncomfortable? Can Meghan be present without being turned into the villain of the next cycle? Can Charles see his grandchildren again without every visit becoming a referendum on Megxit? Those questions are quieter than the old headlines, but they matter more. Because reconciliation is not one meeting. Reconciliation is a pattern that changes. It is one private moment that stays private, then another, then a message that does not leak, then a birthday call that does not become a headline, then a visit that does not require everyone to take sides. Then, maybe, after enough time, the family starts to believe the new pattern is real. That is the only way trust comes back. Not through one grand apology, not through a balcony appearance, not through a statement about unity, through repetition, through restraint, through boring, private, unprofitable consistency. And that is exactly why this moment is so fragile. Because the royal world is not built for boring privacy anymore. It is built for interpretation. Every car arrival becomes a clue. Every absence becomes a message. Every seat assignment becomes a power map. Every source quote becomes a weapon. And Harry and Meghan know that better than almost anyone. They have both used and suffered from that machine. So if they are serious about rebuilding anything with Charles, they may have to accept the one thing the content economy hates most. Nothing. No reveal. No emotional breakdown. No inside account. No exclusive sit-down. No chapter. No scene. Just a family meeting that belongs to the family. That would be new. And maybe that is why the reunion has a different emotional charge. It does not feel like a triumphant return. It feels like a test. A test of whether Harry can let a meaningful moment remain unseen. A test of whether Charles can separate his son from the storm around him. A test of whether Meghan can step back into Britain without the entire visit turning into a public battle over her presence. A test of whether the palace can stop treating access like reward and distance like punishment. And a test of whether the public can accept that not every family moment is owed to us. That last part matters too. Because viewers, commentators, and royal watchers all participate in this drama. We say we want healing, but we also want details. We say we want privacy for the children, but we click on every report about where they went and who they saw. We say the family should stop fighting in public, but public fighting is exactly what keeps the story alive. So when a meeting happens behind closed doors, it frustrates the audience, but it may be the only healthy way forward, especially because the children are involved. Archie and Lilibet did not choose any of this. They did not choose the royal exit. They did not choose the lawsuits. They did not choose the interviews. They did not choose the family estrangement. They did not choose to become symbols in a debate about monarchy, race, media, privacy, loyalty, and betrayal. They are children, and children should not have to perform reconciliation for adults. That is why the absence of photographs may be one of the best decisions around this visit. Imagine the pressure of that image if it had been released. Charles with Archie and Lilibet. The first grandfather photograph after years of distance. It would have traveled everywhere. People would have analyzed the children's faces, Meghan's body language, Harry's expression, Camilla's position, the background, the styling, the symbolism. Supporters would call it healing. Critics would call it manipulation. Every outlet would build a different story from the same frame, and the children would become the evidence. Evidence that Harry was right to come back. Evidence that Charles was forgiving. Evidence that Meghan had softened. Evidence that the monarchy was modernizing. Evidence that the Sussexes needed the royal connection. Evidence for whatever argument people already wanted to make. By keeping the visit private, the family denied the public that image.
And for once, that may be a good thing. Because the emotional core of this story is not what we saw. It is what Charles saw. He saw children who have been growing up an ocean away from him. He saw the living future of a relationship that almost disappeared. He saw, perhaps, that the longer the adults wait, the more the children inherit distance as normal. And that is a hard thing for any grandfather to face. For Harry, the moment may have carried a different weight. He has spoken often about wanting his children to know his mother, Princess Diana, through memory, story, and legacy. But this trip reportedly also included plans connected to Althorp, the Spencer family estate, where Diana is buried. That adds another layer. Because in one journey, Harry seems to be connecting his children to two parts of his past: the living grandfather who became king, and the grandmother whose death shaped his entire life. Highgrove and Althorp are not the same kind of place, but emotionally, they sit close together in this story. One is about the possibility of repair. The other is about memory that can never be repaired, only carried. And that is why the Diana thread matters so much. Harry's life has always been read through Diana, sometimes fairly, sometimes lazily, sometimes cruelly. Every decision he makes is measured against her story. The press, the palace, the feeling of being trapped, the desire for freedom, the fear of history repeating itself. For Harry, bringing Archie and Lilibet closer to Diana's resting place is not just a family visit. It is a way of giving them roots in a story that began before they were born, and before Meghan ever entered the royal world. But it also makes the Charles meeting more poignant. Because Diana is absence, Charles is presence. Diana is the grandmother they can only know through stories. Charles is the grandfather they can still know in real life. And that difference is everything. One relationship is already fixed in memory. The other still has time. Not unlimited time, but time. And maybe that is the emotional pressure underneath the entire reunion. It is not only, can Harry and Charles forgive each other? It is, can they give the children something better than inherited distance? That is the question that makes this bigger than gossip. Because family estrangement often becomes self-protective at first. People step back because contact hurts. They stop calling because every conversation becomes a fight. They avoid visits because the logistics are too hard and the emotions are too raw. And for a while, distance feels like peace. But then years pass. Children grow up. Illness enters the room. People become older versions of themselves. And suddenly the distance that once felt protective starts to feel like a second injury. That is where this family may be now. Not healed, not safe, not united, but aware that time is moving. And time is the one pressure even royalty cannot command. This is why Charles's decision feels less like weakness and more like urgency. Some critics will say he should not have done it. They will argue that Harry and Meghan caused too much damage, that the monarchy cannot keep reopening doors to people who publicly attacked it, that every gesture of warmth rewards disloyalty. And that argument will resonate with a lot of people, because trust was broken, publicly. But Charles is not only managing the monarchy's dignity, he is also deciding what kind of father he wants to be in the years he has left. Those two roles may not always want the same thing. The king may need distance, the father may need contact. The institution may prefer silence, the family may need a conversation. And at Highgrove, for one private moment, the father and grandfather seem to have won. Not completely, not permanently, but enough to bring everyone into the same room. That is why this story should not be dismissed as just another Sussex headline. Something changed. maybe only slightly, maybe only for one afternoon. But it changed. Harry did not simply arrive alone for another strange royal appointment. Meghan returned to Britain privately after years of distance. The children were brought into the family space. Charles allowed it. Camilla was reportedly present. The palace confirmed the meeting but protected the details, and Harry reportedly accepted the condition that the visit would not be turned into public material. Each of those details matters on its own. Together, they create a different kind of story. Not the old story of attack and response. Not the old story of Harry asking for reconciliation, while another headline makes reconciliation harder. Not the old story of the palace freezing him out and calling it stability. This is something quieter, and maybe more adult. That does not mean everyone watching will like it. Some people will see Charles as compassionate. Others will see him as naive. Some will see Harry as finally showing restraint. Others will say restraint now does not erase years of exposure. Some will see Meghan's private return as a sign of maturity. Others will say she only came when the conditions suited her. The arguments will continue. They always do. But underneath the noise, the story has moved from never to maybe. And in this family, maybe is not small. Because for years, the emotional weather around Harry and the royals has been so fixed that people began to treat the estrangement as permanent. Charles and Harry might speak occasionally. Harry might fly in for a coronation or a brief visit after a health scare. But Meghan and the children returning? A private family meeting at Highgrove. The king seeing Archie and Lilibet again. That felt like a different category. And now it has happened. So the next question becomes unavoidable. Is William next? This is where the hopeful tone has to slow down, because there is no evidence that William is ready to follow Charles's lead. And honestly, there are many reasons to think he is not. William's entire adult life is built around the future of the monarchy. He is not just protecting his feelings, he is protecting his household, his wife, his children, and the institution he will one day inherit. From his perspective, Harry did not only leave. Harry made the inside of the family look unstable, cold, and sometimes cruel. For a future king, that is not just painful, it is dangerous. William may believe that letting Harry back in, even privately, creates risk. Risk of leaks, risk of renewed drama, risk of reopening wounds for Catherine, risk of confusing the public about Harry's role, risk of making the monarchy look as if there are no consequences for public betrayal. And if William sees it that way, then Charles's warmth could feel to him like a mistake. That is the hidden tension now. A father nearing the later years of his life may be thinking, "This is my son. These are my grandchildren. I do not want more lost time." A future king may be thinking, "This is the man who damaged trust, and trust is the one thing we cannot pretend is back." Both can be understandable, both can be true, and both can pull the family in opposite directions. That is why the William question is not just the next episode of the drama. It is the real test of whether this is reconciliation or simply contact. Contact means Charles can see Harry. Reconciliation means the family system begins to change. Contact can happen once, privately, carefully, with no photos and no promises beyond the day itself. Reconciliation requires the people around Charles to accept that Harry is not permanently outside every door. And William may not be willing to accept that. At least, not yet. Maybe not for a long time. The tragedy is that William and Harry are the two people who once seemed most able to understand each other's wounds. They were the boys behind the coffin. They were the brothers who carried Diana's memory together. They were the young men the public watched grow up under impossible scrutiny. And for years,
The image of them as a pair was part of the monarchy's emotional appeal. William, the steady heir. Harry, the warmer, freer, spare. Different roles, same history. Different futures, same mother. But that old image may be exactly what makes the break so painful. Because when a relationship has been idealized by the public, the collapse feels almost like a national betrayal. People do not just mourn what the brothers lost. They mourn what they thought the brothers represented. Unity after tragedy, duty after grief. The idea that Diana's sons, whatever happened, would always have each other. Now, Charles and Harry meeting reminds everyone that one door can open, but William's silence reminds everyone that another door may stay locked. And maybe that is the most honest ending to this moment. Not a royal fairy tale, not a complete family reunion, not a sudden return to the old Fab Four fantasy. Just one door, opened carefully. One grandfather seeing his grandchildren. One father allowing his son back into a private space. One promise, reportedly, that this time the private conversation stays private. And one brother still absent from the story. If you have thoughts on this, I want to know where you stand, because this is the question that divides even people who agree on the facts. Do you think Charles is right to open the door for Harry because family time is running out? Or do you think William is right to keep his distance until trust is truly rebuilt? That question matters because it gets to the center of the whole saga. Is reconciliation something you offer because life is short, or something someone has to earn after breaking trust? Charles and William may be answering that question differently. And Harry may now have to prove, not with another interview, but with silence, that he understands the difference. Because the next few weeks may tell us more than the meeting itself. If nothing leaks, that matters. If the Sussexes do not turn the moment into content, that matters. If the palace avoids cold counter-briefings, that matters. If Charles finds a way to see the children again, that matters. And if William remains completely separate, that matters too. The story now lives in the aftermath. Not in what happened at Highgrove, because we may never know the full details. It lives in whether Highgrove becomes a one-time exception or the beginning of a new rhythm. And that is why this quiet meeting may be more powerful than a public reconciliation would have been. A public reconciliation gives everyone the image they want. A private one forces everyone to wait. And waiting is uncomfortable because it leaves space for doubt. Maybe Charles and Harry truly began repairing something. Maybe they only managed a civil afternoon for the sake of the children. Maybe Meghan's presence signals a real thaw. Maybe it was carefully limited and may not be repeated. Maybe Archie and Lilibet changed the emotional equation. Maybe the adult wounds are still too deep. Maybe William eventually follows. Maybe William never does. That uncertainty is the story. Because real families do not heal in clean headlines. They heal awkwardly, slowly, unevenly, and sometimes not at all. They take one step forward and then stop. They have one good conversation and then avoid the next one. They want closeness but fear the cost of it. They miss each other and still do not know how to be in the same room. That feels much closer to where Charles and Harry are now. And maybe that is why this moment has landed so strongly. It does not ask us to believe everything is fixed. It asks us to notice that something impossible became possible. For years, the story was moving in only one direction. Away. Away from Britain. Away from royal duty. Away from the palace. Away from William. Away from Charles. Away from the family narrative Harry was born into. But at Highgrove, however briefly, the movement reversed. Harry came back. Meghan came back. The children came back. Charles received them. And the world did not get the picture. That last part may be what gives the moment its dignity. Because not every important family scene should become an image. Not every apology
if there was one, should become a quote. Not every child's meeting with a grandfather should become proof in a public argument. Some moments only have a chance to matter if they are allowed to remain unseen. So maybe the best way to understand this reunion is not as a grand royal breakthrough. Maybe it is a pause after years of noise, a pause in which a father and son could look at each other without the whole world inside the room, a pause in which a grandfather could meet the children he had missed, a pause before the harder question returns. Because the harder question is still there. What happens when private emotion meets public consequence? Charles has made his move. Harry has apparently made his promise. Meghan and the children have crossed back into a family space many thought they might not enter again. But William remains the unanswered chapter. And until that chapter changes, this is not the end of the royal rift. It is only the first quiet interruption of it. Maybe that is enough for now. Maybe, after everything, enough is not a hug on a balcony or a perfect family photograph. Maybe enough is a door that opens once, a conversation that stays private, a grandfather who gets to see his grandchildren before more years disappear, and a son who, for once, may understand that the most powerful thing he can say publicly is nothing at all. If that silence holds, then Highgrove may become more than a location in another royal headline. It may become the place where the story stopped getting worse. Not healed, not solved, not forgiven in full, but stopped. And after everything this family has put each other through, that may be the first real sign of hope.